name is Rueben George. My traditional name is Skaloos. I'm from the Tsleil Waututh Nation. That's my mom. My dad's from Squamish Nation. They're the two nations, like within two of the three nations within Vancouver, British Columbia. You know, there's about 2.5 million people living in the city here. And our two reservations, my mom's and my dad's, are about 10 minutes away from downtown at some points. And but it's the best of both worlds. We have the ocean and we have the mountains, and it's weird in Vancouver. I still have coyotes that are a problem that eat the cats and dogs around here, and we have raccoons, and in my mom's side on the North Shore, across the inlet, there's still bears and deer and a whole bunch of stuff. We have whales that have come through regularly now, and our salmon count's doing pretty good. And it went down to 6,000 for our original river, but my nation brought it up to about 6 million in 10 years. We did a lot of great work around that. I do environmental work for my nation and stopping the TMX Trans Mountain Pipeline, formerly owned by Kinder Morgan, but we sent them running away because we wouldn't let them build it. And $350 billion company we stopped, and now Canada owns it, and they just came out with an announcement that they're no longer going to put Canadian taxpayers' money into it anymore, and they're going to rely on investors. But Kinder Morgan left, and they couldn't sell it for 2 years. So they said they made Canada buy it, Trudeau buy it. So they're going to have a big problem finding investors. And it's a stranded asset. When they look at the economics of it, it's crazy because based on their first economic analysis of 7 billion, it would take 20 years to pay that off. And now it's going to cost up to 25 billion. So it's a stranded asset, and it's ridiculous. But anyway, that's what I do that. But we do environmental work in my nation too. Like I said, the salmon went from 6,000 to over 6 million. We brought that up. We did work around that. We did elk reintroduction into our traditional territory. That brought back grizzly bears, wolves, and flowers and birds, and started completing the ecosystem by just introducing elk. The second busiest port in the Pacific on the West Coast is Vancouver, and it's dirty. But we've been cleaning it to the degree that for the first time in 40 years, we did a clam harvest. And herring are coming back. So we do good work. My nation has the biggest solar panel farm in the lower mainland of Vancouver. But also I'm a family therapist, but I haven't practiced really for 14 years, because I've been doing this environmental work. But I still volunteer at a men's treatment program. I consult a couple of companies in business. All Nations Cannabis I consult, and I have shares in the company. We opened up 7 dispensaries. We have a 30,000 square foot grow. We're the first First Nation company in British Columbia to have a federal license to grow. And that took a long time, but we did it. But our stores are still run on sovereign First Nation law. And so just like the treaties that are made in Canada and US are supposedly one nation to another nation create a treaty. In British Columbia, we have no treaty signed. So, but we're still recognized as our own independent nations. Like, that's why we say First Nations. First ones here, and we're many different nations. So we developed our own law around marijuana, and we've been with the nation. So our own policies, our own bylaws are all the way down to how to grow, how to test it, all that stuff. We work, I have shares in the lab that do testing on potency of our CBDs and THCs and the mixtures, and actually a lot of the other government agencies go to our lab that we have shares in, and so it's state of the art. We're looking to open another 30,000 square foot grow and 5 more stores in Vancouver. It's a good company. Employs a lot of people and challenges still developing, but it's gonna do well. It's gonna do well. And and also I own a small development company, and for roads and water treatment, and we do also recycling garbage and things like that. We just started it. And how we do that is we create partnerships, and then we get the bids for them, and it's going good. It's going good. It just started. We have good people that I work with. And of course, the reason why we're talking is I got into psychedelics, which I never ever thought I would in my life. But a little bit about my childhood. We were a poor nation. There's a big thing right now that's all over the news globally, that there's been a delegation of First Nations from Canada going over to see the Pope. And the reason why is the Pope supposedly wanted to apologize for the Catholic Church murdering so far over 9,000 children of graves that they found, little babies to 10-year-old kids. They killed so far 9,000 in the residential were here. And the last residential school closed in 1986. So it was a brutal thing that Canada and the church did in killing. But my point of saying that is every First Nation in Canada, one way or other, was affected by the residential schools. But the colonial system that created those residential schools is still the colonial system, like in the US, that we're dealing with today. The jail population for First Nations is still 40%. The homeless population for First Nations is 40%. My cousin did 30 years for break and enter, for stealing. A non-First Nation would get nothing for killing a First Nation. So the murder missing woman inquiry was a big joke, because they should have did it on the coroners, the police and the judges. That's who the inquiry should have been on, and they didn't do that. But anyway, I wasn't immune to all those problems that the residential schools and the colonial system created. I wasn't immune to that, and grew up with a lot of trauma. And but my community did lots of healing. Some of my leadership, my aunts and uncles, and mainly my uncle Leonard George, he said we need economic sovereignty. At one point, when he became chief, there's only a secretary and himself working for our nation. Everyone else worked off reserve, but our employment was like less than 20%. And at one point, a couple of years ago, our employment was zero unemployment. And now we hover around 5%. And we employ about 260, 70 people. Our nation's small. We only have 550. We focus really hard on education. We won back lots of land. The most valuable real estate in North America is here in Vancouver. And I think we won back something like a couple thousand acres of Vancouver land, which equals over $1 billion easily. So we're being really careful how to spend that money. Like, we focus it on culture, language, education, healing. All those things are priority. Our elders are priority. And not one family is going to monopolize that money. We're going to make sure that we're not going to give it away, but we're going to pay our people well. And I think that's what they deserve. And we're working towards that. And we put money into environment, as I said in the beginning. We put it towards, our land and water and fish and salmon and elk and everything, and being green too. So that's a lot of stuff. That's just a little bit about me, I guess.
Except, yeah.
Sorry. And one of the ceremonial leaders for West Coast ceremonies. And then I was made a Sundance chief by 2 Lakota families, the Pompana family in Canada, and a Crow Dog family in South Dakota. So I run a Sundance for the Pompana family up here in Canada.
That's a lot. And so I'm wondering, it sounds like you had some early, just because of the history you're talking about here, that you're referencing, that your life wasn't perfect growing up, that you had certainly had trauma, and your family and community had trauma. But it sounds like this uncle of yours really helped kind of steer you or provide some guidance for you. And it sounds like you've come so far and your nation has come so far in terms of your own health and healing and what you're able to give back. And it sounds like you're really based in giving back, not just taking.
100%. I'll explain it this way. When we stood up to the Kinder Morgan Trans Mountain Pipeline, we did our own 1,200-page assessment. We did a spill analysis. We did a clean analysis. We did multiple economic studies, and that was because the price fluctuated so much. And we did air quality study. And all this was based out of Tsleil Waututh Nation law. The foundation of our law is truth, family, health, and culture. That's the foundation of our law. Essentially the laws of humanity too, love, honor, respect, and all those good things. But we did that much effort just to stop the pipeline. We were doing similar work in every other department. But what we're working towards is whether it's economic development, housing, social assistance, education, language, doesn't matter what housing, whatever department it is, we're still going to come from those same principles. That's our law. That's our law. And so what we do with that is we create protocol agreements with government agencies in our traditional territory. So the Ministry of Children and Families or the police can't come on the reservation and before they talk to somebody, make protocol agreements like nation to nation. So, and with that is we treat our water and lands like they have rights like a human too. So within our territory, we protect it. So in Vancouver, every single development in Vancouver, they need a Tsleil Waututh Nation permit to build. So we get 500 referrals a year, and they need to get a permit. And we do our own environmental assessment. We do anthropological. People come in and do their dig and make sure there's no remains there. But we make sure things are good. So we're already doing it, but we're finalizing that to make sure that we protect what we love, and how we do that is the vision of our elders, and my uncle Leonard George and Philane Jr. too was good friends with Leonard George and Lee Brown and a whole bunch of really good guys, and my aunties and uncles, they did a lot of good work, and it was important as a nation to heal together too. My son said something pretty neat. He in his community, lived in the States, 22 kids died in 1 year. It's brutal, and he knew every single one of them, and so lots of trauma. And he went to trauma treatment, and it was based on my grandfather said, Chief Dan George said, anything you learn in college, university about healing, there's native teaching that says the same thing. And this treatment center did the same thing. He's like, Dad, psychology is individualized. He said, but for our communities, it's communal psychology. And he had beautiful words around it. He goes, and we live together in a community, but the traumas happened together as we were a community. The trauma happened as all at once with residential schools, and so we healed together, and that's what Tsleil Waututh did, I believe. In the early 90s, everybody said, okay, that's enough. Let's make ourselves better, and we did.
That's fascinating when you were talking about what your son said about his experience with getting treatment and the impact of modern day like psychology that we kind of worship as the end all be all or what have you. Like I'm a mental health therapist and I'm a chemical dependency provider. And I've done works at Seattle Indian Health Board, like, chemical dependency groups. But a lot of times it is the 12-step process that I've had to like force down clients' throats. And a lot of times they're Indigenous men, primarily, like you're talking about this overrepresentation, but I saw a lot more men, that were coming out of the criminal justice system. Like you're talking about your brother that got locked up for so long, and
my cousin,
your cousin. And so I feel like such a resonance there because I'm just about to self-publish my second novel that's titled, Yes, That White Woman Wants Your Baby, Stories from the Field of Social Work, because I worked in Indian child welfare and Office of African American Children's Services for a long time. And I just saw a lot of classism and racism within the system and so forth. But what was really interesting is what you just mentioned. There's a part in my book where I talk about, have you been therapized, which means like, have you been taught like how to contextualize your experience so that you can compartmentalize every emotion and label it and kind of do this Western framework, and it can be kind of a raping or a recolonization, I think, to be in that mindset. So I think what you said just really resonates.
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
One thing I believe is like, psychology is it's missing things, and that's spirit. And it's so simple. Just imagine a car. It has four wheels. One's physical, one's spiritual, and one's mental, and one's emotional. Take one of those things away, how is it going to run? And you look at North America and the world for that matter, take away spirituality, how is it going to run? And it's evident. 50% of the world's species have died. 60% or 65% of mammals have died. What's left of those mammals? 80% is livestock. Got floods, got hurricanes, got fires. It's not the new norm. It's going to get worse. It's going to get worse. But when you take spirit out of it, and what spirit is, it's not like, it's just being a good human being. It's not you have to go to church. It's just being a good human being and have an independent thought. I think of my daughter when she went to public school, and then we took her into Tsleil. They gave them option to go to private school, so they did. We tried it out. My son hated it. Took him out. My daughter, she thrived. But in public school, they teach, if you're really smart, you could be doctor or lawyer. But in the private school, she started the school early in elementary school and graduated at 15. Every single one of them graduated at 15. Every single one of them in college and university took political science and business. Be wealthy like your parents and be politicians like your parents. They're doing what they're capable, think that they know they're capable of doing. And that gap of the have and have nots is getting really big. And one thing that I see, especially in the States, here in Canada too, it's people, they catch on a little bit, but the old ugly tactics that the government always used on First Nations of divide and conquer is exactly what's happening to the general population in Canada and the US. You got a lot of people going for Trump, and then it's creating divide, and that's exactly what they want. Like even if when Obama was in there, because he sold more artillery in the last year he was in there than George Bush did in 8 years. So the government is a bit of a distraction. They tell us how to think. In elementary school, said you're smart, you can be a doctor or lawyer. We'll tell you how to think and what you're capable of doing, and then you don't have to question anything. And watch the news, and we'll tell you the truth. But at the same time, it's just mud in their face. The biggest recipient of people that voted for Republicans is old white men. The biggest population of people that go for social assistance is old white men. And it's like politics is a distraction. What Trump did is a big distraction. Get the biggest, loudest buffoon in there to distract everybody from the real horrible things that they did. But it's not just them. It's both sides. Both sides are screwing people, and because when Obama got in there, he had good ideas, but once he got in there, he found out he'd run nothing. It's the people who've been running stuff are still running it, and that's the same with Canada. But I'm glad to say we have success, and I know there's nations down there in the States that have success in protecting and living within our law, and they have to reconcile with First Nations. They do up here, and we're making sure of that, and the healing part of it is creating some independent thought, and that's why we got into psychedelics. It helps. It really does help.
But Rueben, how did you get into plant medicine work? Like, where did your advocacy begin in your story?
I volunteer at this men's treatment program, and we do good work with them. but they started falling off and drinking and using. I was like, what the heck? And I knew about a doctor named Gabor Mate, and I knew about his work, and my girlfriend did work around psychedelics and ayahuasca and stuff. And so, I just came home frustrated, and I opened up my computer, and what pops up is ayahuasca, just on my newsfeed. So I read it. And then I thought, wow, okay, then, just wasting some time. And I looked on Facebook, and one of my friends is a doctor. And she'd posted an article on psychedelics and healing. So I messaged her. I said, tell me about this stuff. And she told me about a year ago. And I said, wow. I said, I'd love for this to be on First Nation sounds really successful. And she goes, it really is. And so I phoned the founder of the cannabis company, Darwin Douglas. He's a former chief of his nation. He's also, he won't say this about himself, but he's a well-respected, really young spiritual leader. He's a little bit younger than me, but is well-respected, and he's the chief of his nation for many years. But anyway, he is the founder of the cannabis company. And I called him and I said, hey, you know what? This stuff might be a good idea. And he goes, I've been on it. I've been working on it for 3 months. I said, let's do it. So I I talked to 4 organizations here in Vancouver. One was Dr. Ray and Empire Health, and then 3 others, and sort of like an interview. But I try to read myself and find out what it's about, and they all wanted to work with us. One of the companies had over $20 million raise in developing their investment, but we went with Dr. Ray, and so I introduced him to our team. And one of our spiritual teachings is like, you can't tell somebody what to do unless you're willing to do it yourself. But none of us, like me, I did psychedelics recreationally when I was a kid, and it scared the hell out of me. I did it a lot. This crazy young kid, but I've been sober over almost 30 years now. But I said, no, I can't do that. No, we're all like, no, we can't do that. And they said, but it's our teaching. So my brother is my cousin, but we call each other brother. He's former chief of our nation too, and he's a really strong business leader for our nations in Vancouver. And anyway, he's like, he smoked marijuana twice. That's the closest he got to psychedelics. And same, all of us, we were scared, and we're like, no, okay. But then we talked to 3 naturopath doctors, MD doctor, and the 3 therapists and the psychologist, and we talked about it. And well, I said, I guess we got to try it. So we did, and I did tremendous healing. And one thing about all of us, the 4 of us, there's 5 of us. There's actually Dessa Cofferson as well, but there's Otis Jasper. He was a longtime chief and counselor of his nation. He has a business background. He has masters in business. Darwin's an entrepreneur and chief of his nation. Justin's chief of his nation. I'm a ceremonial chief. Dessa's a CEO of her family's company, but also she's education coordinator for her nation. And so a lot of good, smart people, but very, very spiritual people. Like in our ceremonies that we go to, like Sundance and other things, our West Coast ceremonies, we're consistently going to a higher state of spiritual consciousness, experiencing heaven in our ceremonies. We do that. So we knew a bit of what's going on. So our first ceremony, we did it with them. And one of the comments was like, wow, I never seen a group of people, and they've been doing this for 25 years, adapted this so quickly. And that's just after our first session. Because we got the higher state of spiritual consciousness. The only problem I had is I couldn't surrender to it. I couldn't surrender. What I seen in our second journey is this whole room here could be my spiritual experience, the whole room. And then what happened was, love has a spirit. 2 people come together and they form a spirit between them. That's love. But any elements come together, like sage and sweetgrass, that's earth. And then you light it with energy of the sun, that's fire. The smoke comes out. That smoke's a spirit with intention. But 2 people come together, a spirit of love is born between them, every single culture in the world honor that love and call it marriage. That's a spirit, but trauma carries a spirit. You work in drug and alcohol counseling. That drug and alcohol is such a powerful spirit. It's alcohol in the our teaching is, as soon as you drink it, your spirit leaves you. But people go through withdrawals. They go through brutal withdrawals that it holds on to and makes them sweat. It really wanted to demand them to use that drug and alcohol. They're really, it really does that. And that has a spirit. So trauma has a spirit. Physical abuse, mental abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, it has a spirit. So what I saw in one of my experiences of a journey, that this is my spiritual experience, the whole room, but my trauma was this big. And it wouldn't let me push it away. It wouldn't let me. It wouldn't let me. And something started happening is that when they lit the sage and sweetgrass, that spirit came in. They sang a song and that spirit came in. And they started showing that trauma a way out. Then it went out. And then my third journey, something happened. And then I was like, this is pretty incredible, because that trauma came and I surrendered to it and I dealt with it and it went away. That's physical abuse, mental abuse, sexual abuse, all those horrible things that happen in residential schools also happen to us. My two older brothers went to residential school, and the nuns and priests murdered, killed, starved, tortured, experimented on little children. And that pain was passed on. So some of that pain I was dealing with in our ceremonies. But after I dealt with it, it was so important that after I dealt with it, I said, I'm no longer a beautiful moment. I said, I'm no longer a prisoner of all the horrible things that happened to me. I forgive. I'm not a prisoner. And then I said, I'm no longer a prisoner of all the horrible things I did. I'm sorry. And then it was a sense of freedom. So they had a psychological model that they're working with, and we took that model and we made it spiritual. Just like my grandfather said, anything you learn in college or university about healing, there's native teaching says the same thing. I did that in my mid-20s when I opened up a treatment center for youth, a healing center for youth. I took psychological programs that are successful in Indigenous communities, but I translated them into our own teachings. So that's what we did with it. We're in the process of what we're doing right now. And we've been doing it for about a year, and we're still working with the same doctors and the same therapists, and we're working with our legal team to see how we're going to do it. And it looks like pretty sure we're going to use Indigenous sovereign law, or we work with a partner with a First Nation, and they put parameters. We work on the parameters around it. I think what we'll do is we'll do some copying about what Oregon did and what some South American countries did about how they created policy around it, because that's what Canada did around marijuana. Canada went to the Washington State and started copying their laws and their bylaws and all the things that they created, and then they started. So we're already going to do that. We're already going to look at what is out there and how could we put parameters around it to be safe, and all the way to the degree that we're looking at the gene testing and DNA testing to make sure that it's going to be safe, that people won't have a psychosis because they're using psilocybin. There's tests that we're looking at with our doctors that could do that with our lab to make sure it's going to be safe. And it's a really good team, and we're doing some really good work, and we helped about 65 people so far.
All ages?
No, a lot of elders have mainly family that came in and volunteered, and mainly family.
But I meant, like, obviously not children, but like, I think sometimes people think psychedelics and they think people in their 30s or 40s. They don't. But I know a woman who's on our political action committee team, and her mother's doing it, and her mother's in her 80s, and she's a African American herbalist. So
yeah, we have 20 to 80 as well. We have multiple residential school survivors who've been in the residential schools, and
That must be so powerful. I just would love to catch their stories because they're a generation that has, like you said, all that really intense boarding school trauma, really so significant.
you know, one of the elders were like, I have a problem being affectionate with my kids and my husband. I can't sleep with the light off. And in one session, she came out and slept with the light off and held her husband and held her kids, and you know, was in one session.
That's beautiful.
In one session.
No, that's beautiful.
Just a really, really beautiful elder, and you know, and same with our other elders. Or some of them are spiritual leaders that we work with and been doing this.
No, I would love to do a documentary on their stories just because I can't think of anything more political, social justice, healing, all wrapped into one, you know? For me, like you're talking about this critical time in human history where the Pope is at least acknowledging, like not necessarily doing anything, but at least acknowledging.
Yeah, he has to do something more, I tell you. You know, Germany just in 2020, year 2020, they just finished paying compensation to what they did in the Holocaust.
Yeah.
They paid $70 billion
Yeah.
for what happened.
Yeah.
Canada and US next to nothing. And the churches, they have $4 billion in assets just in Canada.
Yeah.
And there's 35 million people. Look at California has the same population, and so does New York. So it's 10 times more money what they accumulated in wealth. And that's why they won't come out and say sorry.
Right.
They won't come out and say sorry because they're not admitting, and then when they admit, then they have to pay compensation.
Right.
So they won't.
Right.
They won't. But anyway, it's
to acknowledge accountability.
It's triggering a lot of people, and we're going to do more good work around how we could help our elders for sure.
So one question I have is, I feel like when you listen to like white man's history of the Pacific Northwest, there's this like almost like a deliberate ignoring of oral history for the Pacific Northwest First Nation people. And so my question was, do you find it to be reflective of the colonizer's mind that they cannot conceptualize Native First peoples using or knowing about local entheogens as far as for use for spiritual purpose and healing? Because a lot of times what I hear is the so-called experts, right, who are like generally white male scientists or venture capitalists, they say, oh, no, these First Nation people, they weren't using these plant medicines, as if they didn't know the topography of their own landscape, that they weren't intimately aware of the plants and medicines here. I just find it so presumptuous, and Phil Lane and I have spoken about this, so.
Yeah, I think that's just an obstacle, but I don't think it'd be as hard as it might be in the States than it is in Canada.
No,
but
but
we're going to be.
I mean, do you understand that people are saying that First Nation people didn't even use these medicines?
Nobody said that yet up here, but
okay.
Like no Canadian government or anything like that. But if it comes up, they wouldn't dare, because how we're approaching it, and the first people that we want to help is our residential school survivors.
Right.
And if it's working for them, how dare they try to stop something that we choose to heal our own people with, that we're healing from what they did.
But do you feel like this was medicine that already for thousands of years that Native First peoples were aware of?
One of the nations in up north, when they'd carve a totem pole, they have the same frog in South America that they used up there. But when the tongue is sticking out in that totem pole, that showed that the frog was used as medicine to give them the vision to see what they're going to carve out of that tree. And then in one of our local languages, mushrooms is called death plant. Lost in interpretation. Death, not death as in you eat it, you die. It's death as you experience heaven. Lost in interpretation. So we know we did. We know we did, but actually, you know, it probably will be an obstacle. Exactly how you're saying. It will be an obstacle, but I'm not really worried about it. I think we stand in our sovereign right to heal from the damage that they've done. So,
Right. Another question is, do you experience resistance from First Nation people regarding openness to plant medicines? And what I would hearken back to for me as a chemical dependency provider is I worked at Seattle Indian Health Board, and I couldn't talk about combo. I couldn't talk about ibogaine. I couldn't talk about ayahuasca. I couldn't talk about psilocybin. It really had to be like our way or the highway. And it clearly wasn't really working. Like you talked about these men in your treatment center kind of dropping off and using and drugging and so forth. And I really didn't see much success in my work at Seattle Indian Health Board. But at the same time, I felt like that was the only model, but it felt like it was like the colonizers model. It was the 12-step model, and it didn't allow for use of these indigenous plants or bufo or any of these things. But I feel like it's such a hard subject because I feel like the colonizer came in and told First Nation peoples, you can't use these medicines, or you can't use your traditional ways of healing. So I feel like maybe now there's resistance sometimes within those communities. Do you know what I mean? And how do you have those conversations with folks that are resistant? Or maybe that it was planted within those communities to think that all, quote, drugs are bad. And so how do you gently begin to have those conversations, because maybe people have been brainwashed, you know?
Well, one of my best friends, he said he said he won't, and that's fine. But I think I have almost 30 years of praying in a good way. But before me, I have my mom and my uncle, who created a legacy of Georges that pray in a good way. My grandfather, Chieftain George, was a pioneer for Indigenous rights and through movies and through his art, and so he has a long history. So we have 3 generations of Georges that have a long history of doing good work, and as well as me as my partners. They're the 4 of them are really strong, iconic. They won't say this about themselves, but I see them to be strong, iconic community spiritual leaders in their communities. So maybe I don't know, if it was anyone else trying to bring this to a community, they might not trust it. But working in the communities for almost 30 years, all of us, that we gain trust, that we haven't run into one organization that said they wouldn't be a part of it. So we talked to probably 10 collectively, First Nation run organizations or First Nation, you see, tribes, and every single one wants to be a part of it, wants to heal with it. And a couple of national organizations that are helping Indigenous people across the country, they want to be a part of it. And even people who are in addiction, and I'm a former alcoholic, drug addict, have been sober almost 30 years, and I understand, and I tell them that it has a spirit, and we could use it to help us. That medicine has a spirit. Like I say, you put 2 things together. I have a spirit, the medicine has a spirit, and put 2 things together, a prayer could come out of that. And that's our experience on our journey. And I think we explain it really well. And we haven't run into anybody that doesn't want to be a part of it, except one of my best buds.
No, I think that can be tough to accept, that people have a choice, and maybe it's not on us to figure out why they have a block there, or why they can't be open to that, like that, to accept, people's choices. I know that when I first got into the ayahuasca community, I became a member of the Santo Daime Church, which is a legal church in the US. So I can drink ayahuasca legally with that church. And I was a social worker in Indian child welfare, and also going to go do this medicine, right, with a legal church to drink ayahuasca. But I found that when I first was drinking the medicine, like, people kind of become sometimes really focused on wanting to share the medicine with those that they love or those that they perceive as hurting. So, like, I had been a Native American foster parent, like a foster parent for a Native American organization. when I thought about like the Muckleshoot tribe and how many clients came out of there that were addicted to drugs or alcohol, like my first thought was like, we should go to Muckleshoot and we should do like a big presentation. And, you know, maybe that needs to be First Nation and Native people that are doing those presentations. But I feel like where you're at feels for me so distant from what I see right now enacted with the tribes. You know what I mean? As far as child welfare and snatching babies and like the whole like colonization of the whole criminal justice system and overrepresentation of First Nation and Native peoples. Like, do you feel like, I'm just wondering the sense of responsibility that you feel like, do you feel like it's something that you want to go and talk to tribes like Muckleshoot and that, or do you feel like we can only handle the 12 bands we're talking to right now and I can only do so much education? Because you probably get tired, I would imagine, because it takes time to educate people.
We're talking, having got discussions on that. So on environmental issues, this is tied into what you're saying. This week I invited representatives from every province from across Canada, from way far east, to come to a conference. Back east, they're fighting for their lobster fishing rights. They won in the Supreme Court, but Canada doesn't protect that victory, that law. In Mohawks, same thing. Manitoba, the same thing. Alberta, the same thing. In British Columbia, multiple victories, the Haidewai, the Wet'suwet'en, the Gitxsan, all victories, but Canada doesn't abide by that law. So I'm pulling these chiefs and leaders together to talk about that and to see what we could do about that. But they're like me, they're cultural leaders that lead with those principles. Like my whole team, my sister, and even our lawyers are like this. They understand Indigenous law and want to protect it. And so these same brothers and sisters and who are chiefs, they will do this too, I believe. I haven't talked to them about it yet, but I believe they will. And some I did, and they said, yep, let's do it. Let's help some people. And that's right across Canada. But I lived in the States for over 10 years. And I worked for Tsleil up, and you know, there's a lot of conferences that they sent me to around North America. And I believe I did good work there, and I got to know a lot of really good people. And I talked to them already. I said, this is what we're working on. And eventually we want to come down there and see what we could do. And people go far and wide. If we open something sovereign up here and we could advertise, everything's underground. If we could advertise and say, hey, for the business people and the cultural leaders and the people in the front lines, we'll give you a recharge. We'll recharge your spirit. Well, you know, if you have a spiritual bucket and you keep emptying it from giving services and helping people, then it's going to be empty. And how are you going to work? I said, we'll give you a recharge. If you want to do more healing after that, we're going to do that too. So yeah, we have a plan to have a hub here in Vancouver, British Columbia. Makes sense. The cheapest place to fly to in North America is Seattle, and to and from, and the closer airport is Bellingham, which is like 20 minutes to the Canadian border, about 45-minute drive to where we want our healing center to be. So
you don't have to be Indian or First Nation to come to your treatment center.
No.
And
No.
It wouldn't be inpatient, or you don't know yet?
Well, I think we'd have to put them up for a couple days. I think our program, how we're running right now, is 3 days. And I tried the other medicines that are legal in Canada, ketamine, you know, and then other stuff, MDMA, and but what's native to me and what I like the most is not synthetic, is the mushrooms. I think it's the biggest reason why is because it's native to me.
Yeah. Have you done Bufo?
No.
Bufo and combo. My husband had a long-term drug addiction to prescription pain meds, and I went down to Mexico with him. We know a healer down in Mexico that we really like, even though he's a little bit crazy. He's a little bit cuckoo, but he's a Mexican guy down there. And the combination of the combo which kind of cleans you out and purges you. And then the bufo, which is the strongest natural psychedelic in the world, but it is they talk,
Oh, yeah.
the God particle. Mike
Yeah,
Tyson
yeah,
talks about it a lot.
yeah.
But for me, I've only done it twice, one time synthetic and one time the real stuff. And it really felt like you're talking to God, like I imagine it feels like what dying feels like, or also being born feels like, if you believe in reincarnation.
Yeah, yeah. We're gonna do that soon.
Yeah, no, I think it's amazing if we, like all of us here on this side of the border, are trying to work with, like, as far as mainstream United States government, we're trying to work with these barriers, but they're so slow. But for many years, I've thought, well, why can't a tribe just do this, or a band, because they're a sovereign nation? Why can't they take the lead?
I'm not sure on the legal side of the tribe doing that, and I think it'd be more difficult. But we already proven we could do that with our marijuana dispensaries.
Right. Right. But I also feel like sometimes it's just my impression, but I feel like the First Nation people north of the border, they seem more radical, or they seem like more anti-authority. Like, I don't know. They seem more willing to be part of like La Resistance or something. Just having, it just, maybe more anti-authority towards the government or something.
I don't think it's anti-authority. I think we the way the Canadian Constitution and the history of Canadian law and First Nation law has been challenged a lot more, and with more success. Like, we're on fossil fuels for a long period of 10 years. We won 90% of our victories, and that's about 300 victories in a 10-year span around resource extraction projects. So we have had significant success in exercising our Indigenous rights. And but the problem is, like, it's always difficult. Like in business, for example, on my nation, we put in a permit to build 150 units. I can't remember the exact number. And the city didn't approve of it. So units of housing. Not even 2 miles down the street, they approved another project for twice as many units. So it's still difficult. The colonial system created residential schools and business and whatever else. It's still challenging. But when we work within our law, I tell you this, and maybe we'll talk about this after this happens. When we open up in our Indigenous law, I tell you, they're going to try as hard to demonize it, or they're going to prove, they're going to fast track it. As the Indians can do it, everyone's going to be allowed to do it. That's what's going to happen. But I can't see them demonizing it, because we're going to be putting through our own people first, our own residential school survivors, no way they can, because when they see that success and they're going to challenge it, the backlash will be horrible from not only the Indigenous community, but the non-Indigenous community too.
No, I love it. Like, to be honest, like, this is the most exciting thing I can hear about, because for me, I've been struggling for 3 years to lead the psychedelic movement here in Washington State. And I just feel like I get so frustrated, and it's like I want to move on to the point where we can actually heal people and get through all this bureaucracy, right? Because these are plant medicines that have been part of like the natural landscape since the dawn of time, and I just so appreciate the work that you're doing, and your compatriots, because I feel like it's some of the most important work in the world. I struggle sometimes because I have friends that are huge environmentalists, right? And they say to me, I don't have time for this psychedelic movement. And I'm like, well, can you look at the literature that shows a lot of times people have a psychedelic experience and then they feel reattuned to Mother Earth and Father Sky, and they feel, reconnected, and that we are all connected, and that the tree is not some, entity that's separate from me, that it has its own spirit, and that we're interacting. And like for me, I get frustrated, and I'm just wondering, it sounds like you embody a lot of that environmental crusading hard work of being connected to the earth and wanting to protect the earth. Do you have a hard time getting people that are environmentalists to understand that plant medicine can be part of that environmental work to wake people up to care?
Not really. To me, right now, we could pick and choose who we want to work with, because there's so much interest. There's so much interest. I think we're just the right people to deliver the message because we have a long history of business and spirituality. And but my personal quote, an idea around environmentalism, one of the doctors said this to me, and I already felt the same way. But I'm spending lots of time. Like, for example, when we decided to fight Canada in the pipeline, our elder said, you have to teach them our way. And I said, how am I going to teach somebody our way of spirit to people who don't even understand they carry spirit within inside of themselves? But we did. We took them to court with our assessments and all the studies and all those things. And but it's so hard to explain spirit in our law. And that's like 99% of the North American population almost seems like. It feels like.
I know.
So what I feel sometimes is like environmentalism is really important. And at one point we had 71% of the local residents supported Tsleil Nation and Sioux in Canada for not consulting us around the pipeline because they didn't want the pipeline. It took millions of dollars to put the word out there. And it's a lot of work.
It is.
So what I think is, if I could create healthy individuals, they'll make healthy decisions. So when I'm done with this, I'm in it to win it against the pipeline stuff. But after that, I'm going to move back into this healing again. That's all we want to do. All the business guys I'm working with are going, let's make enough money in business that we could supplement what we want to do is help people heal.
Totally. It's such important work. So in the beginning of this interview, and this is my last question, but in the beginning of this interview, you did like a detour into a subject that I was like, oh man, I was going to ask him that at the end of the interview, but it might seem kind of a woo-woo question. And I'll just read the question to you and you can kind of pull from it what you want. Because you already kind of talked about this, because you did a diversion into Trump and divisiveness and divide and conquer. And you were talking about how like what the infamous they want is what they've done to the indigenous people to separate them and divide and conquer them. And now they're doing it, you said, to the collective whole. And so we're living in this time of great divisiveness. So here's the question. Do you believe spiritually that we are in a time of challenge or crisis, but also a time of healing or reflection? Do you get disheartened by the addiction or the darkness of this world in terms of people and where they're at, or worshiping of money or power? And do you feel there's hope in the spiritual or energetic fabric of the work that you do to sort of counterbalance alchemically those aspects in this world in a time of such deep divisiveness?
Yeah, well, that's one thing first. I give really good cultural spiritual teachings. I do. But it doesn't mean I'm perfect. I go to ceremony all the time to heal myself. I'm not a good example about how to be. I'll say that first. I have traumas and dysfunctions, and my girlfriend and my kids will tell you. They know, they live with me, and I need healing. But so does our world. Like, it's a sad state. It's a sad state that, you know, when the miners would get a parakeet and they go down the mine shaft and the parakeet dies, they know that there's some gases leaking there, so they've got to get out of there. We're almost beyond that environmentally. And it's not going to be too long that there's going to be no edible fish coming out of the ocean. The fires that you see happening are crazy. When I started this environmental work, they said the Northwest Coast population is going to double because of the water shortages in other parts of the United States. Vancouver and Seattle, when I first had my kids 20 years ago, the populations were the same. That population did double. Not quite in Canada, but it did in Seattle because water shortages. You know, the fires are happening everywhere, and the floods are happening everywhere, and they brush it off. But the distractions are are starting when kids are little. Like, I have this weird memory. When I lived in Tsleil, they opened up a Walmart, and we lived on the res, and it was like a 30-minute drive to the closest store, and that was the closest store. So we'd go there, and it just opened. I saw this blonde lady, and she just stuck out for some reason. And I'd go there, I'd see her every time. And then I have a weird memory that I went there again just recently, a couple of years ago, and it was the same lady still working there. And she's talking to this young man, and she fixed his shirt. And he goes, "Thanks, Mom. Have a good day." Well, that's two generations of families that have a gift. And the way we teach in our culture is that every single person has a gift. And it adapts with the times. Somebody's gift might be computers and working on phones or business or whatever it might be. They all have a gift that could help. And what I teach is, I said, if I'm not teaching for the people I'm teaching to surpass me, I'm failing. My friends surpass me spiritually, and they go and receive gifts, and they come back and they teach me. My kids have done that. They do that. And so that's how our society, of how we created to be. When I started this environmental fight, and we hired people, but now we have our own lawyers. Now we have our own anthropologists. We have a marine anthropologist. We have all these people that went and got education, and it's our own people now. We teach them how to surpass us. Stand on your shoulders of your ancestors and grow and be better. But here in Canada and the US, they tell us what we're capable of doing. That lady has a gift. And I think it's more than working there. That boy has a gift, but it's more than working there. But we're told what we're capable of doing and what we could do. And we settle. Got food on the table, whatever, but we settle. And when we settle that things are okay, we don't look at the world around us because we're on blinders. We're told to do what we're doing and stay in our lane. But when you open it up, like to a spiritual awakening, this is my whole spiritual experience. And when I said I dealt with my trauma and I found freedom, pick up a grain of sand. This is my spiritual experience, and this is what happens to my trauma when it was this big. I put it back here. That's how big it is now. Our communities have a cut, a wound, and it's open. What do we do in the ceremonies is it's scars. It's still there, scar, but I could do everything that I want to do. And in our North American way of life, of the American dream, is not there. And it doesn't service everybody anymore. It services the very wealthy. If you're making over 10 million a year, then you're probably on that side. But if you're not, you're like everybody else. The decisions that they make are about them. Everything. CBD could eliminate 80% of opiate use. 80%. It's the pharmaceutical companies that have the biggest fit. That's why it's not legalized. It doesn't hurt anyone. Not going to overdose on anyone. You're not going to get sick on it. 20% of homeless people are homeless because they're given opiates. And that's the same with this. The last thing that our governments want, and industry want, and pharmaceutical companies want is for people to be awake and to see and to have a voice, to have some independence, to have some freedom. Independent freedom to think for yourself and challenge things. When I debate, I prayed I'd debate Richard Kinder of Kinder Morgan, the biggest pipeline company. I had a prayer. And when I talk to any of these guys, any government official, and if it's public, I tell them, I say, I implore it to you, Don't take his word for it. Don't take my word for it. Take time to look at the true facts that are around you. The true facts. Do your research. How much snow did it have in Vancouver that we went for 2 years in a row with no snow at all? It was 1.5 feet high when I was a kid, and it would stay around for 2 months. You know, every river and stream in North Vancouver had trout and salmon in it. None of them do. Everything's dying. And I challenge people. I say, look at those facts. Does he care about that? No. Does he? No. Is he making choices for his future generations? No. Make your own decisions. Doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat, you're still screwed. They're still screwing you. They're still screwing you. Doesn't matter. You know, the new Democrat Party is in for British Columbia. And when we opened up our dispensaries, they said, First Nations are at the top of the list and giving you a license and dealing with you. 200 dispensaries later, they didn't deal with us. And these are the good guys, the new Democrat Party. We told them, I said, you know what? You have a history. You have a history that never in the history of the new Democrat Party here in Canada have you done a significant deal for First Nations. But I told them that straight out. I said, it's always the Liberals who are the bad guys. They're the bad guys. They make deals with us, not you guys. And you're supposed to be the good guys. And so, in a way, around politics, it doesn't matter who's in for First Nations. It doesn't matter. It's still an uphill battle. But we're winning, though. And that's the good thing. Up here, we're winning. And we have to push a little bit harder. And one of my friends, late Art Manuel, he said, all the work that the Indigenous leaderships have done for decades has come to fruition. You better now take the time to seize that opportunity before that window closes. When it closes, may never open again. So we have to push hard now and think of what the Canada or the US might say next. All these natural disasters that are happening around the world is taking all the budget. Now we can't service you. Can't service you. And they're going to make it difficult. If it becomes legal, like they try to do with marijuana, the bigger companies are going to take over. Canada, just like the liquor in Canada, they distribute. And I know I saw in Washington State around marijuana, they're changing the legal bills every single week. The smaller companies had to hire a lawyer every week, ended up shutting down all the small mom and pop shops. Now they're just the bigger ones are taking over.
No, it's disgusting. It's horrible. So it sounds like I just want to kind of conclude the interview, but there was so much that you shared that was so rich for me. And I just wanted to comment on a couple of things just to share as the interviewer. When you were talking about your own ceremony and how your own trauma was like over you, and then you saw it like shift and move or be affected by the alchemy of the other spirit, that things get created, that love is a spirit, just like trauma is a spirit. When you talked about that, I felt like kind of even a movement in my body, just like a reaction to it, just such powerful language. And for me, you've given me so much hope about like, well, what is the future of plant medicine? And I think we think that Native people are going to be behind this. First Nation people are going to be behind this, just like they were behind it for cannabis. And they touted the party line that cannabis was bad. And then by the time they did dispensaries, it was kind of like after other, like, big white business owners or big conglomerates. And I just feel like you're doing the really hard work of like how to be a plant medicine revolutionary, but from the Indigenous perspective, because I feel like that's maybe where the biggest wound is that you talked about, this wound that will scab up in a ceremony so that you can be functional. I feel like that's another great analogy. And I just want to thank you so much for your time today. And just, if you have anything else to share, but like, I just, I appreciate that you're saying that I am not a perfect human being. My girlfriend and my kids would tell you I'm full of insecurities or dysfunction or whatever. I find there's a beautiful humbleness in that, because I think a lot of times we have plant medicine leaders who don't have a sense of humor about themselves, right? Who can't see kind of their own bullshit. And so I really appreciate you commenting on being a flawed, individual.
And one thing I say in ceremonies, I say, when you come to my ceremony, don't be mystical. No need to be mystical. Just be yourself. Be authentic. It's good enough. You don't need to have an idealism about how it is. It's simple. But I appreciate being on. One thing I close with is around the psychedelics is one of my friends said, you don't have to go through what you've been through to heal. And one of my other elders that have been working with us, he said, sometimes don't let your healing get in the way of the spiritual experience. But sometimes that spirit will come in. The spirit of healing will come in and show you. And what it's showing you is that spirit of that trauma. And sometimes you got to deal with it. But that there's a cause and effect. Two spirits came together, created that trauma. But that's where you have to give the medicine the reverence and holiness that it deserves. And that's what we do before we do ceremony. We pray for it for a day. We give it the holiness and reverence it deserves. And then everything else that happens around it when we light medicines, that the holiness and reverence of lighting that medicine, because when you introduce, like, for example, if somebody's struggling and we figure they struggled enough and that we're going to push that trauma out of them, we'll come over. I held the elder's hand and I said, I'm gonna push that trauma out of your being, because one thing we believe in, and I prayed all over the world, in New Zealand, Australia, Southeast Asia, South America, Central, all through the everywhere. I prayed, and they always use fire, earth, water, and sky in their ceremonies. I see and I know what's going on. And one thing that I noticed too is in their spiritual homes, like my sweat lodge, when you're going to pray and you're comfortable, your spirit will expand to the size of that lodge, but so will everybody else's. Then your spirits are overlapping each other, and that's how you become brother and sister. But you have a heartbeat, and when you choose, you could use your heart to push out the hurt and pain out of your spirit. Push it out. Push it out. So that's what we do. When we sing our songs, we have a spirit, and the air has a spirit. We sing a song that's the spirit of that song. But we'll sing the song and use the smudge or medicines to push out that spirit of trauma in them. We'll push it out, and then we'll let them have their beautiful experience of a higher state of spiritual consciousness of heaven. And that's when the magic happens. When you're in the heavenly state, my teacher says, when a prayer will be successful when you have 100% belief, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, 100% belief. And the best place to have that 100% belief is the higher stage of spiritual consciousness of experiencing heaven. And that's when you pray for good things. That's where those teachings of humanity come in: love, honor, respect, dignity, pride, compassion, understanding, truth, and knowledge and wisdom. Those are the good teachings that we work with. When you come out of that, how would you not make better choices for yourself, your family, your community, your country, the land, the water, the people? That's what we teach. That's where we're going. That's how we want to heal. That's how we want to love. That's how we want to exist. And that's what's happening.
That's awesome. I'm going to stop recording there.